So you're trying to get into wildland firefighting, but you have no idea where to start. You're in a career, you want to start something new, or you're just out of high school and you have no idea what you want to do with your life and you see something about it. So, what I want to do with you today is talk to you about kind of an intro into wildland firefighting and what that looks like. Some things to include today that we're going to talk about are certifications, how to get into a volunteer, how to get into a career, and what this time before getting into a career looks like, at least for somebody like me. So, welcome to the very first edition of the Rusty Pulaski. Insert music. Ta-da-da-da. All right. So, for the last God knows how long, I've been talking to you guys about bikes and cars and all these different ways of philosophy, whatever the heck I want to talk about. But today, what I wanted to do was change a little bit and talk more about the wildland fire side, because I've mentioned it here and there before, and I've talked a little bit about the things that I've been able to do with my limited time as a volunteer, but I really haven't had a chance to put it all together. And I thought that the best way to do that is to kind of assist those who are maybe brand new to it as to what it looks like for somebody who's just dipping their toe into it so far, and things that I've noticed, things I've seen, things that I've done to help me, and what's going to go on in the future. So to start us off, let's just jump right into it, and I want to talk about your certifications. So you kind of have a couple of different paths to start with. You can either jump directly into a volunteer department, and they'll usually help you get your wildland fire certification, or you can go through a private organization and get your certification beforehand, which will make it a lot easier to get into volunteer departments and later on to career departments, meaning that you get paid, right? So all of us want to get paid. It's a nice thing about it. But to start off, usually in the firefighter aspect, you do have to volunteer at some point. A lot of us go through the volunteer. Some people get lucky and jump right into the career. But for the most part, you're going to have to start with your certifications. So what are those? Some people call it Fire 2, some people call it just Wildland Firefighter certifications, but the specific numbers that you're going to be looking for are the S130 and the S190. This also includes two classes through FEMA known as IS100 and IS700, and that's all about incident management, kind of like the, what would you call that, chain of command, what an incident looks like when you're on the line, who you're going to answer to, all that good stuff. So all the kind of the government side of everything that you need to know when you get into it. And then S130 and 190 is all about the fire itself. So fire behavior, how you kind of try to stop fire, what certain weather patterns are going to do for you, how to read, relative humidity, all that good stuff. So what I did personally was I went through a organization, a private organization that hosts their own S130/190. So right now, I guess technically I have two certifications of the same thing. So your S130. And the way that I did that was first by my own accord. So I spent, my own money getting the S130/190, and then I took the IS classes online. Now, I think the way that it works is that you have to have someone sort of sponsor you in order to be able to get access to those IS classes, the FEMA classes. I could be wrong that you might be able to do those for free whenever you wanted to. So don't quote me too much on that one. But to start off, I went through an organization in Salida, Colorado called Colorado Fire Camp, very fitting name. And it cost me about, just shy of $500, right? So what this does is, again, open up those IS classes, 100 and 700, all about chain of command, all that good stuff. And then being on site for, I think it was 3 days to get your certification for your S130. Now, another class that I got through that was the L180. And I think that's all about something to the effect of behavior of your your coworkers, how to help them out during tough times, talking on radios. It's all about linguistics, I think is what the L stands for. So sometimes you'll get that and sometimes you won't. It's not, I don't want to say that it's not essential, but when it was mentioned, it definitely felt like an afterthought. So understand that the S130-190 is the most important piece out of that. But in order to get your red card, you do have to get your IS-100 and IS-700. So we'll talk about what a red card is here in a minute as well. So anyways, if you're listening to this in the future and COVID is no longer an issue, I did this during the COVID time, so it was a little bit altered than what it usually is, meaning that I spent less time at the actual fire camp to, obviously mitigate people getting too close, promote social distancing, not spread the virus kind of thing. So I ended up taking the S190 class, which is all wildland fire behavior, online. Now, understand that in the future, it's probably very likely that you'll take both of those in person with that organization. Okay, so those are your certifications. To review: S130, S190, all about wildland fire behavior and being able to learn tactics on how to fight fire, and then your IS-100 and IS-700, which are both incident management, government side of the fire type stuff, and then finally your L-180, all about linguistics. So, what do you learn in S130? And so, some of the things are really specific to fire, whereas other things are kind of just specific to working with the government and being a first responder. So, to include things like talking on the radio and knowing how to talk to dispatch, knowing how to talk to different departments, right? Other things like what PPE looks like and how to dress properly and how to make sure that you're on time and you're where you're supposed to be. Chain of command stuff, so what a crew looks like, how that's structured, how many people you have in a crew, who's the leader, who are you, what are you on the fire line, that kind of stuff. And then finally, there's a lot more to it, but also just simply put, the tactics of trying to stop a fire. So these could include working on the line. It could include drip torches. It could include indirect fire line, using the trucks that you're going to have as a department to stop fire, whatever the case may be, whatever you can get access to at the time, right? Because no fire is ever convenient. It always starts at an improper time of day when you're in the middle of something, and it's never right on the road when you want it to be. It's always a pain. So you have to be flexible and know how to use all the different tools available to you, right? So that's your S130, 190. And the nice thing about it too, when you do it with a private organization, is that they do it very blanket statemented. So in other words, if you do it with a private organization, it's not going to be specific to a department that has specific tactics that they like to use. It's going to be something to the effect of, this is what most departments do, so we're going to teach you that. So if you, let's say you don't know where you want to end up for a department and you're just kind of trying to get your feet wet, doing the S130 with a private organization is really helpful. Now, on the other side, my second S130 certification, so like I said, I kind of have it twice, is with my volunteer department. So I'm a volunteer with one of my local departments that covers a county, right? And what we do is essentially throughout time, not in a 4-day weekend or whatever, but throughout time, say a month or two, is learn, first of all, and practice and kind of redo some of the things that you're going to learn with the private organization trying to get S130. So my department likes to do things a certain way. This could be anything from the type of trucks that they have that might be different than another department's, the types of tools that they use, what the line looks like that they like to make. So line would be preventing a fire from jumping over a line. You have to construct a line. And that's all stuff you're going to learn through the S130. And with that department, they might teach you, hey, most departments do it this way, but we like to do it this way because it helps us for XYZ reason or whatever. And also, too, remember that everywhere you go is going to have a different topography and a different type of environment. So in Colorado, for example, we have a lot of, they call it PJ, so the juniper trees, and a lot of scrub oak. So there's different tactics to fight that than, say, if you live in California, there's a ton of, I don't even know what's out there. Let's say it's redwoods, right? I don't know how to fight fire with redwoods. I barely know how to fight fire with juniper trees. So different departments are going to have different tactics. So anyways, that's your certifications. Now let's say you get your certification through a private organization. Now you're like, okay, what's my next step? Usually it's trying to get with a volunteer department. Some of you may have prior experience with things like forestry or, outdoor tools. Let's say you worked on chainsaws for a while, or you were a faller for trees, any of those things. You probably know enough about the things that you need to know on the fire line to jump straight into career. But let's pretend that you're fresh out of the oven, you just took your S-130 like me, you have no idea what's going on really, you have no prior experience with the fire. Usually your next step is to want to get into a volunteer department. So a lot of places, especially places that are kind of in the middle of nowhere, will have volunteer opportunities, and many counties will have volunteer opportunities as well. So some are more involved than others. And in a perfect world, you would get a volunteer department that gets, 4 calls a week on big fires, and you can jump in and out however you want. But that's not always going to be the case. So just be prepared for when you go into a volunteer department that it might be super slow. And for me, for a long time, it was until just now, the tail end of our season. We're looking at, I got 3 fires back to back within a week. So, it's at random. You can never predict a fire, right? You can always say today's going to have high fire predictions, or hey, today's a red flag warning, but you can never actually predict when and where a fire is going to be until something goes off. Let's say it's dry lightning, or some dummy is driving and throws a cigarette out his window. You just never know, right? So you get into a volunteer department, and usually what you can do is reach out to most of your local agencies. My advice would be not to reach out to the big interagency hotshot crews. They do not usually take volunteers. Now, I'm just speaking from my limited experience and knowledge. If your local crew takes volunteers, I would highly suggest you go to that. But for most of us, you're going to be able to go to some structure departments do have a wildland specific department, which is pretty cool. So like if you live in, let's say you live in like Frisco, California, or whatever, or Fresno rather, Fresno Fire Department may have a specific wildland fire segment where they have their brush trucks and their Type 3s and everything. And then you can go to them and say, hey, I'd love to be a volunteer. Now, what they're going to do for you is a couple of things. Okay, so number one, they're going to get you experience, and that's probably the most important thing out of being a volunteer. Getting experience and being on the line looks incredible for your application, right? So when you get, let's say you're working with Fresno, the city of Fresno, California for a year. You volunteer from July to July, right? And you're looking at, or rather, let's do it September to September, because the fall time is usually where hotshot crews will open up their positions, and we'll talk about how you access those here in a sec. So let's say you work with them for a year as a volunteer, and you've worked on anywhere from 10 to 20 fires. You've done line, you've done booster line or booster hose rather, from the Type 6 trucks. You've been a swamper, meaning you pull the trees away from what the sawyer guy just cut. In other words, to do with the chainsaw. You're doing all these great things, right? So you're getting experience, and you're able to write that in your resume to say, hey, I've been on 15 fires. 2 of them were national emergency fires. So we had an on-call with, departments from all over the country. And all of that is going to look incredible on your resume, because it shows that you're not just a fresh-faced guy who knows nothing about fire going into a department. You're ready to jump on the line at a moment's notice once you start at that career department, right? So again, career meaning that you're getting paid to do what you do. So anyways, you go through all that, you get your volunteer time in, and what that also is going to do for you is get you your red card. Okay, so you can't just get your red card by getting your S-130. You have to be with a department in order for your red card to be valid. Reason why is essentially it's something with the government. I forget exactly what's going on, but essentially a department has to, quote, sponsor you as a firefighter. Volunteer or career, not either one, you're going to be able to get a red card with that department. So me, for example, getting the certifications that I have, passing the fire academy with my local department, and now being on fires, I have a red card that is essentially a resume of all my certifications and all of my time on fires. And that red card will get thicker as you go along and you get more certifications, right? So, last thing a volunteer department can do for you before you go into the career is even more certifications. So one of the biggest ones to get to be a well-rounded firefighter in the wildland spectrum, at least, is to get your S212. So what is your S212? That is your Sawyer capability. So in other words, you can use a chainsaw and you know how to use it. And that's super essential for a 20-person crew, right? It's typical what you're going to see for hot shots is 20 people. So why is that important? Because you're going to be well-rounded. Even if you're not using the chainsaw, the department knows that, hey, if we need a chainsaw guy, I can count on you to grab a steel 461 and go chop down some trees, right? So getting that S212 through your volunteer department, one, you don't have to pay for it. Typically, it's like $600-$700 depending on who you go through. And you're going to get experience using the chainsaw. So again, getting well-rounded, building up your resume, okay? So that's what volunteer departments can do for you. I'm not saying every single one will, but a lot of them can and will help you out with that process. It just depends on who you go through. So when you're, quote, shopping for your departments to volunteer from, if you have more than one to choose from, I would definitely suggest talking with the chief and talking with people who work for that department to see how often they do trainings, how often they recert their career guys, how often they're going to certify their certifications for their volunteers. You feel free to ask those questions and you kind of feel out, hey, is this department going to work for me? Is this something that I want to do? And are they going the way that I want to go, right? So with all that being said, let's go back to our example that you're some guy in Fresno, California. You've been working for a year on a volunteer and it's September, okay? So here's kind of how it works. Each region of the United States puts out their applications for 10 days at a time. And your responsibility is to know whatever region you want to apply for, you know when those dates are. So like right now, today is the 20th of October. I don't know which region it is specifically, but the Idaho region just posted their hotshot crews for the 16th of October to the 26th. And then there's going to be another wave, I think in November, right? So it all comes in waves, and you have within those 10 days to apply for those hotshot crews. Now, a little different for COVID right now, but next year I think it should be kind of going back to normal as to when those dates are. Okay, so it's September, you've got all your certifications, you're a volunteer, you've got a bulletproof resume. Where do you go from here? You are going to go to USAJOBS.gov, and this is where all of your federal positions are going to be posted. Okay, because remember, every interagency hotshot crew is funded through the federal government, so they're going to use that medium to post their jobs. You can always reach out to your hotshot crews that are local to you or the ones that you want to work for and say, hey, I'm really interested. What do you guys think you're going to have this year, and when are you going to post them? And usually, especially if they like you and they see your resume, they're going to tell you what's going on, right? So you go on USA Jobs, and let's say you see some stuff. You see some stuff that makes no sense. Typically, what you're going to be focusing on is the pay grade. So the pay grade is going to be anything from GS1 to GS9. Now, the GS kind of scale shows how much or how little experience you have. So typically, when you're starting off as a volunteer and you've got all these certifications and whatnot, you're going to be looking at the GS3 and sometimes GS4 level of jobs. This means that you don't need much experience or just a little bit, enough to know that you know what's going on. Once you get into the GS5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that's more of your specific kind of positions. So Firefighters work on task books, right? Wildland firefighters work on all their task books. Right now, I'm working through my FF2 task book, and I'll have my FF1 probably next year to work on. What that means is I can start applying for specific, I guess, positions. So an example of like a GS5 or 6 would be like an engine boss, or a heavy equipment boss, or an engine operator. So you're looking at more specific capabilities of a wildland firefighter, not just somebody who can be on the line and work with the saw, right? So that's kind of like the guys that you're going to answer to. And this will all make more sense once you take your IS 100 and IS 700 classes. Like I said, that chain of command and the positions that you're going to run into, right? So you go on USAJOBS, you're typically looking at, like I said, your GS3, GS4 position level jobs. And the kind of hot button name that they all kind of posted under is forestry technician. Now understand, not every single forestry technician posted job is going to be about fire. It will tell you specifically what that job is. Like today, for example, I looked, and some of the forestry technician jobs are for like checking the health of the forest, or like literally being a technician for the forest. So some of them make it really easy. They'll say forestry technician parentheses fire, or forestry technician parentheses hotshot interagency crew, whatever the case is, right? So it's all just going to depend on what you want to do. Sometimes there's just hand crew jobs that are posted, so kind of the not step below, but a little bit less used than a hotshot crew is your type 2 crews, right? So those are guys that will typically stay more local within their state most of the time, and they won't go on or national stuff too often, at least as far as I'm aware. Some of them will, just depending on where they are and how useful they want to be. But for now, let's assume that's the case, right? So you go through all those jobs, and what you're going to want to do is three things. One, get all your certifications nice and clean on PDF files, scanned. It says your name. That is your certification. You can, I think the FEMA ones, you can get reposted at any time. However, your S130, S190, you need to make sure you keep good track of your originals, because they're not always going to be easy to access through the internet. And you might have to pay someone to get copies of it. Okay. So some other things I've run into as well. A lot of crews want you to be able to drive the trucks. Not CDL necessarily, but they do want you to be able to drive the Type 6s. So your Type 6 is, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, it's essentially a modified 5500 level truck or 4500 level truck, depending on the crew, that has a pump on it. It has a booster line, meaning a hose connected to that pump directly from the truck. Water holding capacity capabilities. So like most Type 6s, I believe, carry 350 gallons. That's usually the government mandated. Somewhere around that neighborhood. So anyways, they will ask you for a copy of your license, a valid driver's license. And they may also ask you for a copy of your driving record. So if you have a ton of speeding tickets, maybe just be aware of that. Try to pay them off before you apply to those jobs, because they will ask you for those things, especially those at the state level. So outside of USAJOBS, you also want to look at any positions that are applied through your state. So like in Colorado, for example, one of our state entities is called the Division of Fire and Prevention Control. Division of Fire Prevention and Control. There we go. So DFPC, for short, they will post jobs of local state crews, and those state crews will have things that you can apply for, and it'll be a little more specific to whatever it is they want you to apply for. So like USAJOBS is pretty streamlined. Once you figure out how to apply for one job, you can kind of apply for all the other jobs the exact same way with the same certifications. However, with state jobs, you might want to have your cover letter be a little more specific to that, or, kind of input a little more of like what it is you want to do with that crew and those kinds of things. But again, just kind of feel it out. Like I said, same thing with your volunteer crews. You can always shop through and see, hey, is this something that I want to do, or is this a crew that I want to be a part of? Do I like this location? You can be a little bit more picky with that, right? Whereas if you just want to be a hotshot and work with the crew, I would say apply for every single one that you possibly can. All right, so talked about USAJOBS, talked about certifications. What else can we talk about here? I guess lastly, you guys, just be aware of what it is you want to do with your wildland firefighter career. Do you want to be an engine boss? Do you want to be a supervisor at some point? Do you want to just work on a hotshot crew as a young dude until you're 30 and you can't swing an axe note or a Pulaski anymore? Think about what it is you want to do with your career and how you're going to get there. So like for me, for example, eventually I would like to go to the engine boss, and I would like to work, a little higher up, GS5, 6, 7 position, and then work my way slowly towards the structure side, which is a complete different story. But having that experience as a wildland firefighter is going to help you get over to that other plane, structure side, right? So a lot of you guys will run into those questions as you go through. But for now, just remember, certifications are number one priority. If you don't have those certifications, you can't apply for these jobs, pure and simple, right? Like I said, there's private organizations, but most of the time you can get all that stuff through a volunteer organization, especially if you already have one in mind and you have one that's local or a friend that works there or something along those lines. Jump in with them. Get some experience. It's not a necessity to get those things right away, especially if a volunteer crew is going to take you without any certifications. Jump head first. Have fun with it, right? It's all about getting that experience. So for me, I have very limited experience, but I do have things that I can reference in an interview to explain, hey, this is how we do handline, or hey, this is how I was a swamper on a fire, or this is what our Type 6 truck looked like, right? So any of those things can help you get through that initial step of trying to be a wildland firefighter. Now just remember, too, that this is a big world, but it also is a very limited world. There are not going to be 100 different positions open for hotshot crews every year. There may only be, let's say, 20 nationally, right? Remember, it's not just you that wants to do that job. It's you and a ton of other guys that may be even more experienced or have 6 years with the volunteer crew or have way more certifications than you do. So make yourself sellable, make yourself known, and write down everything that you have done with your volunteer crew. You could do this in your resume, you could do this in your cover letter, you could do this in a ton of different mediums, but make sure that that information is known. Don't just copy paste your certifications, write your name, and say hello. Make sure you get that all out in the open so they know what they're dealing with before they even interview you, okay? All right, so I'm going to end there and tell you guys thank you for listening. I hope this is helpful for anybody who's looking to get into the wildland fire career. Feel free to leave comments for questions. I'm always happy to answer these. And hopefully, as I go through this process, I'll have more information to help you guys out with, and we can add more additions to the Rusty Pulaski podcast. Anyways, all right, you guys. I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week, and we'll talk to you later.